Welcome everybody to Pearls of Wisdom, how to have courageous conversations. This short webinar with me, Mike Ponting, and I'm joined also today by Sharon Young. So welcome, Sharon. So this short webinar is going to be thinking about difficult conversations. Well, Sharon, what sort of difficult conversations are we going to be talking about today?
I think there's all types of difficult conversations you can have. One of the ones most frequently people talk about are difficult conversations around performance. So with their employees, where someone is underperforming or where someone is maybe resisting change is quite a major thing at the moment. But it can apply to any aspects of your life. Difficult customer conversations where you're not able to give a customer what they want, for example, and you wish you could. Or just conversations with friends, family, anyone that you maybe have potential conflicts with.
It's a tricky one.
So what I'd like to do is it is. What might be useful is to get those listening to take a minute to press the pause button and to jot down on their template form what are some of the difficult conversations that you have to have.
Excellent. So if you pause for a moment and jot those down and come back, we'll explore what makes a difficult conversation difficult. I guess there's a lot here in terms of how we work, how our brains work, and our emotional response to conflict and differing points of view. What are your thoughts on this, Sharon?
Absolutely. A lot of this is what goes on in your head whenever I run sessions on this with people. That seems to be the big thing, that they build themselves up so much beforehand. They worry about what might happen in a conversation. And generally, they make it 900 times worse than it actually is when they finally get around to having a conversation.
Yes, I've done.
And I think...
Carry on.
I was going to say, I think it would be useful for the listeners to have a think themselves about what makes a conversation difficult for them. So thinking about some of those difficult conversations that you have to have. What is it for you that holds you back? Is it what I've just said, that how you worry about it? Is it past experiences from the person? Is it maybe you haven't got any experience or had any training on how do you give feedback? How do you deal with conflict? What is it that makes those conversations difficult for you?
And I certainly think in terms of high performance organizations and leaders and managers that are kind of role models, they're very good at having those difficult conversations. So what we're going to be exploring today is how you too can have those difficult conversations in a more productive way, so it doesn't end up like a bun fight. We don't want this to become the reality, the rock, paper, scissors, stone, to be the way that we handle conflict or have those difficult conversations. So we're going to be exploring today some of the reasons why we avoid these difficult conversations. I think part of it, from my experience, is the fear. It's easier to put your head in the sand, hide from the situation, rather than do it anyway. We just don't do it because we're entering into that kind of panic zone. It's driven by a psychological need to be liked, but also it can be exacerbated by negative self-talk or the perpetual what could go wrong if, what if they bring up this, what if they react like that, I don't want to deal with tears, I don't want to deal with aggression, and all the what ifs in terms of our own sort of head tapes can have an impact here. Anything
it's that kind of vicious circle, where you talk yourself down. So you start off thinking, oh, I know, like last time I spoke to this person, they ran circles around me and I'm not really sure what I'm talking about, and I'm going to get muddled and they're going to laugh at me, they're going to think I'm stupid, and everyone's just going to think I'm really bad as a manager. Oh, it's better that I just don't have the conversation. And you talk yourself down. It's almost like you've got a little angel and a devil on your shoulders, but the devil's got a megaphone giving you all this negative feedback, and the little angel that's saying, no, you're okay, has probably got a bit of a sore throat, and is drowned out by the negative things. So that negativity and that how you talk yourself down is a major impact for a lot of managers, I found.
I totally agree with you, and it's about staying in a zone for you individually that stretches you a little bit, but before you hit the kind of panic of, oh my God, how am I going to deal with this situation? And that's exactly what we're going to be exploring now, is looking at the 7 key pearls to help you have those difficult or courageous conversations. We're going to talk through each pearl in its own right, giving you some examples and some real things that you can go away and do to help you have those difficult conversations.
Absolutely. And when we created this model, we wanted to make it something that was simple and easy to remember. So that's why we've looked at 7 pearls. So that's the most that you generally can remember consciously at any one time. And we've given them slightly easy to remember, catchy names for each of them. But we will talk through each of them now in more detail so you can understand sort of how they relate. And as we go through, again, it'll be useful for you to use your template and to pause at various points to jot down your thoughts at each of those levels. So if we start with pearl number 1.
Ready, set, go.
Pearl number 1. Ready, set, go, indeed. And this is really about getting yourself in the right state. That's the main thing. Obviously, firstly, you do need to identify what are these potentially difficult conversations, these things that are going to cause you issues. But it's very much about getting the right mindset. So we've talked about the negativity. So to get on the right side of that, we use something we call positive affirmations. So think about all those negative voices and head tapes that you hear and turn them on their head. It's a bit like that idea of fake it till you make it. So sitting there saying, I'm confident I can do this, it'll be okay, I know what I'm doing, I've got the facts, I understand what's happening here. And saying those things to yourself over and over, if you can, out loud, obviously not in the middle of a meeting room, but I tend to do these things when I'm driving to work in the car, for example. If you can't say them out loud, at least say them in your mind until you talk yourself up. So you convince yourself, okay, I can do this. Your unconscious mind will ultimately hear these messages and it will help you to create a new mindset with things. Another good tip that works is changing your physiology. When you feel really down and nervous, think about what your body is like. You tend to try and scrunch up and take up less space, and you look down and you kind of hang over your lungs and you have less breath from doing that. But when you're feeling positive, you're kind of standing up, your back straight, you're smiling, your head's up, you're making eye contact. And there's a lot of research that shows that it works the other way around. Mm-hmm. So normally your psychology affects your physiology. But if you change the way that you stand, just practice it now as you're listening. Just kind of sit up straight, put a big smile on your face, and adopt a positive physiology. That will in turn, along with the affirmations, help you to create that success mindset and be feeling more positive about things. And that will help you to identify it. The other thing for here is the breaking the cycle of conflict is really that idea about identifying what are the attitudes that you've got that might be negatively affecting the situation. So attitudes about yourself, attitudes about the other person, attitudes about the thing that you're going to be discussing. And starting to think about what are these things that are going on within you that may well affect how you move forward in a situation. So again, take a minute now to pause the recording and to jot down what are some of those things you need to think about. What are some positive messages that you can give yourself before you go into your difficult conversation? And then the second pearl is about the future is bright, the future's POSEE. Not rosy. It's rosy as well, but it's POSEE. The reason for POSEE is it's a good methodology for helping you to set outcomes. I don't know about you, Mike, but a lot of occasions I've had when things have gone wrong in difficult conversations, and trust me, I've had a few of those over the years, is when I've really not been clear on what I wanted to get out of it. Is that what you find too?
Totally. Yeah, I think there's something here about knowing what you want, and this is a really useful technique to help you identify exactly what it is, what are the outcomes that we want. It's also a link to
and I think
how your brain works. If we can identify exactly what that goal is, then we're more likely to be able to move towards it in terms of adjusting our behaviour. Whereas if we don't know what it is, we're less able to be flexible with our behaviour.
Exactly. And I find this with a lot of managers that I've spoken to, that they go into a situation and they're not really clear. They know they've got to talk about something. They've got a problem to talk about, but they're not really clear on what do I actually want to get out of it? What does success look like? So the well-formed outcomes are really about saying things that are positive. So not about saying, I don't want this. Because interestingly, your mind ignores the negative, the not, and you'll focus then on the thing that you don't want. So what's a positive? I do want this. It needs to be something that you can influence. There's no point trying to set an outcome that is outside of your control. The more specific it is, easier it's going to be for you to know if you've achieved it. How are you going to achieve it? So is it evidenced or measurable in some way? And it's worth checking as well, because every action has a reaction. So what's the ecology checking is, if I do this, if I get what I want, what's the impact going to be on me, on the other person, on those around us? So really, this is very much about thinking about, where do I want to get to really? And what's the current situation, and what's the area I've got to play in? So I guess from a negotiation point of view, what am I prepared to accept as a result? This is my ideal. What else is my negotiation range, if you like?
I totally agree. And I think as well, having a bit of a disaster plan. So plan B, if all goes wrong or for whatever reason, what's our alternative? What's our plan B? Gives us a sense of power.
Yeah, definitely. It's almost, if you know you've got an alternative route, if everything goes completely wrong in this conversation, then you feel a lot more confident to push a little bit harder, to take a risk, to say what you really feel about something, because you know it's not your only option. Probably works better sometimes in more general negotiations, not maybe quite so easy with say, for example, staff performance issues, but it's certainly still worth thinking about what's the next step. What will I do if this doesn't go where I want to? So you don't feel, again, it probably takes that panic zone away that you talked about right back at the beginning. If you know you've got somewhere else to go, you're being stretched, but you're probably not completely in panic from that point of view. So again, take a minute to pause now and think about for you, and again, work through really ideally a specific situation that either you've experienced in the past or that you think you may experience in the future. And think about, for that situation, what is your POSEE? What is the outcome that you really want? And, you know, where are you now? So take a minute or two to think about that in terms of your question. And then when you're ready, come back to us. And we're going to move on now to Pearl number 3.
I love this
Mike,
one.
tell me what you want, what you really
It's great. A bit of Spice Girls always spice things up. But I tell you what, these courageous,
absolutely
difficult conversations with members of staff, with customers, with other people, it's very much about how we give feedback. And more often than not, we know what we want to fix as a manager or a leader. We know what's wrong, and it's easy to point that out to people. But actually, that doesn't leave people with a good feeling or a sense of willingness to change. So I think this Pearl 3 is really a crucial way of delivering feedback. So describing the positive future avoids it being a negative, you did this wrong conversation. So looking at what we want to achieve in the future, but then describing it really specifically. What is the issue? And why? What's the effect of that on the team, the individual, the organisation? By doing that, it enables us to have a conversation which isn't personal. It's not about blame. It's about understanding, which enables us to really kind of stay on goal, stay focused on that, and communicate with clarity and purpose. And I think what we share with a lot of people in the workshop environment is how exactly we can do this. And there are lots of models for feedback, but this one's particularly powerful and easy to remember. What is the action? What's the impact of that action? And how do we want it to develop or change in the future? Again, it's leaving people feeling positive and confident and okay, even though it may have been a difficult conversation. And again, it's not easy, but it is about practice.
Exactly. And an example of that would be, so if you said to someone, you're always rude to your colleagues. Yeah. If I said that to you in terms of feedback, Mike, how would you feel? How useful is that as a feedback?
Well, it's not. It's overgeneralized. It's overgeneralized. It's not specific enough, and it makes me feel like a bit of a worm, really, because you think, well, I'm not. I don't always be rude to people. So immediately that attitude will create a reaction which is not going to help.
Absolutely. So if I said to you, okay, Mike, yesterday I heard you talking to Jim and you said, get over yourself to him. I found your tone to be quite harsh and walked away without giving him the opportunity to reply to you.
Mm.
The impact on that was that Jim felt actually really demotivated, and it affected his productivity for the day. What I'd really like you to do in future is to go and have a conversation with Jim, and to explain how you were feeling, what was the issue behind it, and to have a proper two-way conversation so you can resolve the issue. How does that compare to what?
Well, it's streets ahead in terms of detail. It's not fuzzy. It's very specific. It outlines the impact of what I did, and it's very difficult to challenge that. I'm unlikely to be able to come back with a conflicting. Well, I'll give you my view of a conversation, but I'm very unlikely to develop I'm going to change attitude because it's specific.
Yeah, exactly. So that's effectively what I did. So the action is when you spoke to him, you said get over yourself. The impact was his demotivation and lack of productivity. Development is, can you go and have a conversation with him to do this? Now, obviously, we've done a very quick version here for the purpose of this recording. In reality, you would want to make that a two-way conversation. So you would tend to follow that up with a question, which brings us really nicely, actually, on to Pearl number 4, which is knowing me, knowing you. Which is, if we dive into,
I think we use it.
So if we dive into the second one, we do.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the iceberg here, the human behaviours that we see, and the observable behaviours are driven by our attitudes, are driven by our stuff that's under the surface often. So this get beneath the surface. Well, the only way we're really able to do that is to ask questions and to kind of pinpoint exactly what's driving that behaviour. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things for me is when we ask questions, we tend to ask far more closed questions than open questions. It's something through management development programs I've really noticed. People say, well, I've asked loads of questions. And when I'm observing scenarios, I do a little tick of how many closed versus open questions. And it's amazing how often we go straight for closed questions, which is quite natural because our brain is searching for the one right answer.
Right.
But the reality is, when you're dealing about people, there's no such thing as one right answer. And it's almost like you have to work much harder by asking closed questions, because you just have to hope that you're going to hit on the thing that is the right thing. Whereas asking open questions, so what's going on here? How do you feel about this? Can you explain why you did this? Those questions will get you far more information than, do you understand why this is the wrong thing to do? Yes or no, really. It's those kind of things. So really, if nothing else, I would really advise people just pay attention to the type of questions you ask. And if you feel you're not getting much feedback, I think there's a fair chance that you're asking a lot more closed questions than open questions.
In simulations and in business simulations, when people are feeling a little bit towards the panic zone, you'll find you're dead right. The default is to go, can you, did you, should we, can we, is it, will it not? And all we get is this yes, no, which actually enhances the feeling or the atmosphere of conflict. So
it is. It's that quick fire backwards and forwards, isn't it? It becomes like an interrogation, if you like, at that point sometimes. Yeah, and I think you're right. It really doesn't help with building that atmosphere of comfort when you're having those closed questions. And then the other thing that comes with that, because sometimes open questions can make people feel a little bit exposed, it's about building that rapport beforehand. So it's about adapting how you speak to sort of the speed of their speech, matching some of their body language, feeding back some things that they've said, and sort of showing in that I see you, acknowledging what they've said, even if you don't agree with it, acknowledging that for them it is truth and it is a reality, and that will help someone to feel that you're on the same wavelength, which will open them up to want to share with you what are some of their underlying interests, which will help you to resolve the problem much quicker. So again, for those of you listening, you want to take a minute to jot down for those last two pearls 3 and 4, be clear. What do you want? What's the problem? Why is it a problem? And then what are some questions that you could ask to understand where the other person is coming from, And what could you do to help build that rapport with them a little bit better? So again, if you want to pause the recording for a moment and jot down some ideas, and then when you're finished with that, we'll move on to pearl number 5. So pearl number 5 is, it's nothing personal. We touched on this, I think, earlier, Mike, that sometimes a lot of it's about the other person and the relationship you have or don't have with them. Have you ever had that sometimes where you've got someone that you just know that they're going to react in a particular way?
Yeah, I totally get this. And I've seen it a couple of times, actually, in particularly contentious kind of board meeting scenarios, or even pre-board meeting, a kind of real conflict, real aggression coming out, and real blame coming out, and it's like, it's your fault, I can't do this, and we shouldn't be doing this, and it's all wrong. And actually they're focusing on it's him that's done it. And actually that can lead to people feeling victimized and have an impact on their own self-regard and how they view themselves. It's toxic in a corporate environment, in an organizational environment. So looking at the problem, not the person, is the key to do this. So let's look at how we can solve this together and not get into this blame game. You did this and I did that. If an apology is needed, if you upset somebody, then we need to man up and have that conversation and say, I'm sorry, I didn't realise the impact that I had on you, if appropriate. And I think the biggest thing here is leaving the ego at the door, and we will explore kind of the ego states, the parent, the adult, the child, and how we communicate from those 3 different ego states can have a massive impact on the reaction we get back from the other person. So can we?
Absolutely.
It's important to stay in that adult factual, recognizing that it's not emotional. It's not about not being emotional, but being aware of the emotions that we're experiencing and which ones are appropriate to express.
I think that's right. I think it's that accepting the emotions you're experiencing, but I think it's the preconceptions and your beliefs about the other person that potentially you want to look at re-exploring. They talk about the Pygmalion effect, don't they, in terms of if you treat someone a particular way, they're likely to behave that way. So any of you that have read Pygmalion or watched The My Fair Lady, there's the example where Eliza says that to Pickering, I will always be a lady because he treats me like a lady, but to Higgins, I will always be a flower girl because he treats me like a flower girl. And there's that idea of treating someone like a jerk and they'll behave like a jerk. There's a lot of that around actually this day in policing with the concept of restorative justice. One of the biggest issues with young first-time criminals, that the whole process criminalizes them and treats them like criminals, so they start to think like criminals, whereas and they may strayed off the path a bit, whereas the concept of restorative justice brings them back, face to face with what they've done and getting them to do something to pay back to society in a more productive way than being locked up, and isn't treating them as criminals. And the success rates for reducing reoffending is huge by not treating them as criminals. So it's slightly different when you're talking to your employees in this situation, but I think the concepts behind that of how you view someone, how you treat them, are really important. And I think bringing emotions in terms of saying this is how I feel is perfectly acceptable. I'm feeling a bit nervous about this, but actually saying you make me really uncomfortable is not acceptable. So owning your own emotions is fine, but blaming someone else and pushing things onto them, I think is not. So that's where, if you feel you're doing that, come back to the outcome. What were we trying to achieve with the outcome? And is this helpful? Is feeling like this helpful? Probably not. So let's focus on something that will get us back to the goal. And that's where that second pearl is really crucial to come back to at any point.
I totally agree.
Again, you guys listening, so for you guys listening now, take a minute to think about the other person involved in your situation. What are your preconceptions about them? What are you owning your own emotions? Is there something that you need to apologize to them for? Is there something that you need to pull out of that so you can focus on what's important? And then we'll move on to pearl number 6. And pearl number 6 is I'm okay, you're okay. So really the main part of this is about making sure throughout the negotiation that you're both okay. So a lot of difficult conversations, people feel it's a bit of a win-lose situation. I have to come out the winner. I have to beat you. Mm. In terms of difficult conversations, that's really not the way to go. And in fact, even in sales conversations, negotiations these days, people talk about aiming for a win-win. So not win-lose, that I win, you lose, or vice versa. Actually being in a situation where we both get something out of this. Mm. And so to do that, we need to make sure that we feel that we're being treated okay as we go through. We're looking at things that work for both of us. And it's really important from an emotional intelligence point of view here to make sure that you stay aware of what's going on with you and with the other person. So you might right back at the beginning in Pearl 1 have got yourself into a really good frame of mind and you're sitting up and you're really positive, and you've got your goal in mind, and then the person's taking you off on a few routes and you're now getting really confused and you're starting to get worried that maybe I didn't have it right in the first place, and so your body language changes and you're hunching back down again. And this is about thinking, hang on a second, something's going on with me here, and it's recognizing that you're changing your state and then being able to take an action to do something. So go back, say your affirmations in your head, take a minute's break if you need to, do something to bring yourself back to a right state. But it's also about picking that up from other people. I mean, what sort of signals have you seen in the past, Mike, when you've been having these sort of conversations with people that show you that maybe the other person is getting worried or upset or angry about something?
Well, I think it links back to how we give feedback too. The key thing here is you can't accept responsibility for somebody else's emotional well-being or emotional state. We can only control and have an impact on how we respond to those situations.
Yeah.
And by doing so, we have this knock-on effect in terms of the Pygmalion effect that you mentioned earlier. The key bit for here is to make sure that you are okay. So alert and aware of what emotions you might be experiencing. So if somebody comes back with I had this the other day, actually. I was doing some coaching with a country manager, and it came back with an incredibly negative, overgeneralized kind of I'm playing the victim kind of situation. Not me, it's the industry kind of thing. And I noticed the impact it had on me was a sinking feeling in my stomach. I noticed my shoulders hunch over, and my breaths got shorter. I had a bit of a kind of, oh crikey, this is going to be a difficult conversation moment.
That's interesting. You create your own then, don't you? Because it is going to be difficult. Yeah,
exactly. So I recognised it quite quickly, and I thought, actually, I need to just shift. I know this works. I need to be able to be okay with this conversation. I need to be okay with what I'm experiencing. Let it go, and also notice that that person is also on their own journey and they've had their own experiences that have shaped them. So being alert and aware not only of my own state, but of the state of the other person, will help guide our options for moving forward to end up with us both being okay without it being it did feel at the end of that conversation like I'd been pushing water uphill for an hour, or doing something very difficult. And I noticed also that probably had the impact on the quality of that conversation down to my response to it. So I think the alertness and the awareness is picking it up as it happens. This is something you can't really plan for. You can't really plan for it. You can be in the best emotional state, but things can change as people maybe come back with an aggressive, or come back with a blame. I think it's your fault we're doing this, and I don't agree with you, and this is all wrong. If you've got somebody who's deeply entrenched in that they're not okay, it can be difficult to manage our own emotional state in those situations. So,
absolutely, and I think it's really important to think about the impact that you're having, because as your state changes, again from an emotional intelligence point of view, we talk about the idea of emotional contagion. So if you're starting to feel frustrated with that person in the situation, then that's going to, whether you realise it or not, in your tone of voice, your mannerisms, that's going to come across, which will then start to affect the other person. So if a frustrated person is trying to coach a frustrated person, that's really not going to be effective. So it's about recognising that, changing that as soon as you can. But also, I think it is about the other person as well. So if you're talking to them and you recognise that they seem to be getting very withdrawn or getting very frustrated about something as you're talking, for me at this point, it's about calling them on that in a positive way.
Yes.
So saying what you're saying and then feedback and say, look, Mike, seems to me like you're getting a little bit frustrated about this. What's going on? What's the problem? What can we do about this? And actually then go back to that knowing me, knowing you, to sort of to get understanding what's driving them. Maybe one little word you said that wound them up, that was a trigger word. Maybe you said something that's really fundamental, or something that's triggered a belief or a fear that they have. But it's, if you come back and recognizing that with them, again, it keeps to build the rapport, and it stops you carrying on regardless, because sometimes you get to that point of, oh, I'm 90% through this conversation, if I can get through the next 10 minutes, oh god, it'll be over and done with. So it's not letting them take you over, it's making sure that the people are more important than the process, and keeping both of you there. So
there's a bit of a danger here as well, is if you suddenly have an emotion or an intuition that you ignore it. That person's not feeling okay, they're frustrated, or they're angry, or they're or subdued and not responding. It's important just to follow up on those intuitions and just double check in that you are having the right intuition. You seem a little bit frustrated. Do you want to tell me a little bit about what's behind that? Back to the questions. But also there's another thinking about the amygdala hijack, the fight or flight response that can also happen when somebody comes back with an aggressive kind of "you're wrong, I don't agree with you" tone of voice. Is that the body sends out a shot of adrenaline, which changes your cellular makeup and actually become more blinkered in our view of the situation, and much less able to flex our behaviours, because we're rigidly fixed on this outcome. So we're less able to explore some of these options. So it's just being aware of how you do deep breaths. It's not you. You're okay. You're on track. You know what you're doing. You're okay. But maintaining that even keel will really help having those courageous or difficult conversations.
And I think in summary, it's looking at the two things. So it's being aware of your own state, and if that's moving, taking yourself back to Pearl number 1 and getting yourself ready, set to go again. Being aware of the other person's state, and if you're noticing something in that, then coming back to Pearl number 4, knowing me, knowing you, and asking questions to help bring them back on side.
So we end up with both of us being... So the final
Pearl then we...
Sorry, so we end up with both of us...
Absolutely, we end up with both of us being okay.
Yeah.
Definitely. So the final Pearl then is, this is not the end. So this covers the end part of the conversation and beyond. So it's really important as you're going through to always be checking. As I just said, people quite often want to get to the end of the conversation really quickly, but it's worth checking that the other person is in the same place as you. And this isn't just saying, do you agree? Or do you understand? Because most people say yes, they don't like to say no. But maybe what they agree with isn't the same thing that you think you agree with. What's that expression, Mike? I know you think you heard what I said, but I don't think you understood what I meant, or something along those lines.
Brilliant.
We all have different views of the world and different maps of reality, if you like, based on our experience. So the same fact, the same words will actually mean different things to people. Never ceases to amaze me how easy it is to misunderstand someone else's communication. So always be checking, for me, means getting them to check back and say what they understand it to be, to make sure that's the same as you. At the beginning, you said we were setting outcomes that were POSEE, that were specific and evidence. So this is thinking about how we're going to make sure that we have achieved what we wanted to. We've said this is our goal, this is what we're going to do. How do we make sure we make this happen? And there may have been some difficult things in that conversation, but finish on something positive. Even if it is as much as, I'm really glad we've had the opportunity to talk about this, and I'm sure now we'll be able to move forward in a much more productive way.
Yeah, clear the air.
But the most important thing for me, Yeah, clearly, yeah, exactly. So even if you haven't necessarily agreed something, but you've both explained how you felt about it, even at that point, you can still end it on a positive. So for me, probably the really important things are, don't then just think, right, that is done, I'll brush it back under the carpet again. You can learn so much from conflict. In fact, actually, it's one of the best ways that we learn. If everything stays easy, we don't tend to move and change and evolve very much. Only when things go wrong that we have our greatest learning. So take some time to think back over the situation and think about, well, what happened here? What went well in terms of the way I dealt with it? What wasn't so good? What can I do better next time? Maybe what can I do to avoid it happening in future? Because prevention ultimately works best. So if you can build a good relationship with that person in the future to enable you to be more comfortable bringing things up when they're a little bit of a niggle before they become a major issue, that's going to save you an awful lot more difficult conversations in the future. So it really comes that foundation of building the relationship with the individual moving forward. What's your thoughts, Mike, on after the difficult conversations? What tends to happen then?
Well, I think it's keeping your finger on the pulse of change and seeing that things are moving in the direction that you want them to be moving. Just I want to go back one step if I can, thinking about great leaders and great managers that truly motivate, engage and inspire their teams to go that extra mile. They rarely do have those conflict situations because they're actually having those conversations earlier in, like you say, before it's a niggle, before it becomes something serious. Prevention really does work best. Going back to your point on what happens afterwards, I think it's having regular check-ins. It's checking that person's okay with making that change. It's observing those changes, supporting those changes, and doing what you say you were going to do in terms of support and nurturing that change. It's very easy to go back into how you viewed it at the beginning. You know, a difficult, challenging person, and I'm never going to change them. Doesn't matter what I do; it's not going to make any impact. It's easy to slip back into that mentality. So I think it's really important that we keep our finger on the pulse of our own attitude towards that, and keep that keep a high level of awareness around that. How do I support this change?
And a really and a really good technique, I think, to help you out the other side of these difficult conversations. And this applies whether it's gone well or whether it hasn't, but maybe particularly when you found the whole process to just be horrible, is that sometimes our most challenging situations bring us some really positive things. And a colleague of mine recently sort of talked to me about a concept that he looks at, which is whenever there's a difficult situation, he always looks to find 3 positive things that have come out from that difficult situation. And he's got me to do it a couple of times actually when I've been in situations, and it's amazing how many, and I end up not being able to stop at 3 sometimes, because you think, actually I've learned this and I've learned that, and that's really good. His example particularly, he recently has been going through chemotherapy for cancer, and he said he found quite a long list of positives from that, interestingly, but the main ones being that it helped him to appreciate much more his relationship with his wife, who after 20 years has been taken for granted, that he'd started his own business the previous year, and so it gave him the time to really focus on what he wanted to do and to make some plans and to build his website. And thirdly, they've decided to move back to sort of the area from which they came, because that's something they've been thinking about for a long time, and just realised actually that's what they both want, but they've never spoken about it before. So very difficult personal situation, but even some good coming from that. And I would say it's a really good technique for people if you struggle with those difficult conversations, to almost reward yourself at the other end. Think about what are the positives that have come from that you can take that will help you moving forward, because trust me, there will always be something. Might be a little bit hidden, but there will always be something coming out of those.
It's a great, and in terms of emotional intelligence, it's reflective learning. What have I learned from that situation? What did I do well? To continue to do? What did I do not so well, and how would I avoid that in the future? It's an essential component of being emotionally intelligent. That is reflecting on that. So I guess in summary, thinking about the the last slide for us to share today, If all else fails, we put the 7 pearls into practice and it still doesn't work, then we can try this.
Yeah, or actually what we really meant by that is it's kind of bring a bit of humour into it. Do you know what? Whatever happens, you know, you'll get through it. You're not likely to actually be sort of facing the cannon or any of those kind of things. I think it's that, you know, just put a little bit of lightness into things. There's nothing so bad that we can't get over it, and it'll be over soon enough. You know, think about that positive physiology. So just a quick summary then of the pearls. So pearl number 1 was ready, set, go, getting yourself in the right frame of mind to be doing things. Then pearl number 2 was about what do you want to achieve? It's about getting that clear outcome at the other end that's positive, that you can own, that's specific, evidenced, and you've checked the ecology for. Pearl number 3, I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. So being clear, being specific about what the problem is, why it's a problem. Knowing me, knowing you is getting to know the other person, what's important to them, what are their thoughts about it, what are their feelings, what are their priorities. It's nothing personal, focusing on the problem, keeping your ego at the door and keeping focused on your end goal. I'm okay, you're okay, being aware of your state, of the other person's state, not letting that affect the other person, and make sure that you end up with a point of view that you both feel okay at the end of the conversation. This is about a win-win, not a win-lose. And ultimately, this is not the end. Finish off the conversation positively, but take it away and learn from it. So you've all got your templates that accompany this webinar. So if you haven't finished any of them already, take a little bit of time to go back through. Think about your difficult conversation that you have to have and how you're going to prepare for that. And good luck in the future with all your Power Courageous conversations. May they go well, and may you learn loads from in the future.
Thank you ever so much for listening, folks. And from myself and from Sharon, we wish you all the best in the future in terms of having those difficult conversations. And we hope that some of this stuff will be really useful to you in to help you deliver and have those difficult conversations in a more positive and more constructive way. And we look forward to working with you again in the future. Sharon, thanks ever so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And
thank you, Mike.
I'll look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.